Late Sunday night, and my wife turned to me and said, I'm feeling pains in my chest, and they're stabbing pains. They're shooting down my arm. This, of course, immediately causes concern. We called 999. We got the ambulance there, and it's a shame. It's really showing the state of things that it was a high priority, and it still took over an hour for the ambulance to arrive. My wife goes into hospital quite a bit with the different ailments that she has, but this was obviously quite scary. Obviously, something more severe was going on. She'd had strange headaches for the last couple of days, and being epileptic, we assumed it was part of that. Once she was in hospital, they assessed and they realised that she had a bleed on the brain and she had suffered a mini stroke. She was in for over a week. She only got home yesterday. It's been one of the hardest weeks of my life. I think the biggest challenge that often doesn't get spoken about when you've got SEND kids, when you've got kids with extra needs, extra anxieties, extra issues in their life that they're dealing with, is the snowball effect of one thing going wrong, creating more issues. That's really what I experienced. And I think it's one of those things where so often we say we've got to talk about where we're at in our own mental health, and we've got to talk about these issues that we face or they don't get out there. And I want to do that while I'm in the midst of this, because I think it's so important to talk about where we're at right now, not once we've got through it and say, well, I got through it. It's about that processing of the moment, and that's what I'm really looking to do. As my wife went in, it obviously had a trigger effect. My daughter was woken by the fact that the ambulance had come and that we had the paramedics in the house. Now, my daughter's well established on this channel. My daughter's a PDA. She is autistic. She has an elevated level of anxiety. And when something like this happens, you can see her masking it. While the paramedics were there, she was coping. She was being incredibly helpful. She's a very caring person. Her empathy through the roof. We've talked about that before. She really feels a very high level of empathy, especially for the people she's very close to and really cares for. We got through. The ambulance paramedics were fantastic. They got my wife out really quickly and into the ambulance and off to hospital. We're used to my wife going into hospital for various things. She's got a lot of illnesses. She's got a lot of conditions that really do hinder her life experience in so many ways, but she never lets it stop her. She keeps trying to push forward, even though it might do her damage in the long term. She wants to embrace every moment. This time, though, she was in for over a week. We only got her back yesterday, which was a Tuesday, and she was in since obviously Sunday evening. It was just a really, really hard time. With each passing day, the anxiety for my daughter was increasing. The concern about why isn't she out yet? She's always out by now. Although she's in hospital a lot, it's generally only 1 or 2 days. Things are sorted and she's home. The fact that the time was dragging just made this more and more compounding, particularly for my daughter. My son was very able to handle things. I think he's kind of grown up knowing that mum goes into hospital, but she always comes out. He didn't have the same level of anxiety triggered by it, but he obviously really, really cared. He had a couple of moments where he broke down and said, I really miss mummy. When's mummy coming home? For my daughter, though, I think probably the advancing years, she's 13 where my son's only 8. She understands a bit more, and she was able to pick up more from the conversations she overheard, which, obviously you try to keep private and secret, but, she picks up on these things. Kids do. I think they have far more resources than we often give them credit for. Learning things like this was a stroke, not just, something to do with the epilepsy. This was something that was more concerning, more worrying, more severe. She really took that on, and you could see her taking it on. The problem that we have is that when the anxiety is triggered, we've talked about it so many times, what creates meltdowns? It is that overloading of anxiety. What a meltdown is a panic attack. A shutdown is a panic attack. A shutdown is an internalized panic attack, whereas a meltdown is the externalized panic attack. And that's really what my daughter tends to flick to. She's an outward display. It's made things so much more challenging. And the first thing we've really noticed was that the school avoidance went up massively. We've been experiencing a lot of school avoidance lately. It's something that my daughter's been really struggling with. She's okay at school once she's there, but that morning routine for a PDA, there's just so much, because it's getting up, it's getting out of bed, it's getting your teeth cleaned and having a wash, it's getting your clothes ready, getting dressed, making sure you've had your breakfast. She likes to do her own lunches because she has control over it, but yet it's another demand on her. She has to get out of the house, into the taxi, and get into school, and that's just in the first hour or so of the day. It's demand on demand on demand on demand, which for a PDA is anxiety upon anxiety upon anxiety, which means that that's building and building and building. And that anxiety has really made it very challenging for her to face going to school. And we've had a lot of really, really difficult days where she's refusing to go to school, or she's taking actions which are really inappropriate to try and avoid having to go out of the door. It's been a very, very difficult week. For me, I've got my wife in hospital. I've got something that's potentially very dangerous happening. I've got my daughter who is really struggling, and therefore the behaviours that challenge that she exhibits become more pronounced. They become more obvious and they escalate, they're increasing, and that makes life that much harder. That impacts on my son. He sees all this. He's trying to get through what's a challenging time for him, albeit without so much drama, but it's still something that's clearly playing on him. And when you've got these extra things added, it just adds more stress. Then I had to be getting into the hospital to make sure my wife was okay and give her some company and just reassure her that we're here for her. All this back and forthing, it's really started to take a toll on my personal mental health. The difficulty I think we have as parent carers, for people like us who have loved ones who have these extra needs in their life that are placed upon us. I wouldn't change my family for the world. I wouldn't change anything about them except to, make things happier for them, take that anxiety away if I could. That's really the only thing. My family are my priority, and I will always put everything above myself in that. But I think that means that we talk about it so often, that the necessity that we have to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, because by looking after ourselves, we're looking after our families. If I'm out of the picture, then there's no one to replace me. It's just going to put pressure on everybody else. And I think parent carers with linchpins in a much bigger picture. It's one of those things that, how do I deal with that at the time? I need to prioritize my own mental health and my own physical health, not because I'm being selfish, but because I'm actually being caring of those around me, knowing that my place in this family is really, really important. And without me, things aren't going to function as well as they do while I'm around. Part of me's really masked over the last 1.5 weeks. And I think it's been interesting experiencing that and realizing that's kind of what I'm doing. My struggles are there, but I've got to kind of push them aside, because I've got to put on the happy, positive and, reassuring side, because that's the best thing for my family. The difficulty is that's mentally exhausting for myself as well. I keep going through these things, and I just have to sort of put it aside. I'm trying to make sure that I take time for myself. My mother-in-law was on the phone to me yesterday and we were talking. She said, make sure you're taking that time for you. She said, go and grab your guitar. She was great. She was like, please go and grab your guitar. Do something that's going to recharge you a bit. We had a very challenging morning with my daughter yesterday, and she called my mother-in-law about it, and we were just catching up afterwards. It was really nice to hear that from someone else, I think. And I think that's something we don't always get. I feel remarkably privileged to have the family that I have, in the extended family I have. My mother-in-law is very understanding to what goes on and how difficult life can be for a household like ours, with the limitations and the issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So a big thank you to my mother-in-law. She's absolutely been fantastic. Right now we're in a position where things are starting to kind of go back to normal. My wife's still quite ill. She's got to be on bed rest for quite some time, and she's going to need some physio to recover. The difficult part of that is, I think, that part of the masking that takes place, that trying to keep on top of things. Once you sit down for that moment and try to relax, your body is aware, and it starts allowing you to bring all these things that you've been repressing up, and it makes it so much more challenging. I've already been on an anti-anxiety med for myself, just because it's been a very hard year or so, and I'm needing that, and I make no bones about it. I think if you need that, you should get it. I don't think it's something you should shy away from. Again, coming back to, if I'm out of the picture, then who's going to replace me? There's no one available to do that. Taking a step back and allowing myself to relax a bit. It's really brought up all these emotions, and I wanted to share it with you, being really open. I think it's so easy to talk about this stuff afterwards, but I'm going through this right now. I don't have all the answers. What I do know is that I need to make sure I'm looking after myself. I'm really blessed in that I've got an amazing support community around me. And for those of you who haven't engaged online, joined maybe some Facebook groups, or engage with the community around you to help get that support. It's so important. I've had messages today from people at Parental Minds just making sure I'm okay, checking in on me. I've had the same from family, and my own mother has been very, very careful to make sure she's calling every day and just checking in on how we're all doing. It's a really challenging time, and I think it's compounded by the fact we're living in a very challenging world at the moment. All these worries that exist in the background, rumours about what's going to happen to personal independence payments, where they're going to take it away from. How difficult is it going to become for people with hidden disabilities to be able to prove that they are in that position? All this stuff, it all builds up. And we have a remarkably stressful life as it is, as carers, as parents. We have an even more stressful life, I think, when we're dealing with the send things. And it's not a stress that I resent, but I think it's important to acknowledge it's there. There's something more that we are dealing with. But when you start adding all these things in, finances are a remarkable stress. It keeps people up at night. And when we're relying on these things, and I make no bones about the fact that, we receive PIP for my wife. She needs that. I think we're probably lucky in that she displays physical disability with it, as well as the hidden disabilities. We're not going to be challenged by that so much, but it worries me. It's like, what are we going to do to replace that money if they reduce it or take it away? It really does start to weigh on you when you see reports in the news about the mistreatment of people who are neurodivergent and all these sorts of things. All these pressures that come piling in, it all compounds, and they're little things. But the problem with the little things is it's like when you're saving money, isn't it? It's those few pennies that you save on a loaf of bread that add up over time. I do a thing where I always make sure I've drained the pipe when I'm filling my car. I drain the petrol pipe, so as much is going in as possible. Just those little few drops that fill the pipe and go in. Over a year, that's going to add up to maybe, I don't know, half a tank of petrol. That's money I'm saving. That saving's accruing. It's little bits at a time, but it adds up at the end of the day. And I think these little stresses, using a biblical reference, this isn't a religious thing, don't stress, but it talks about a little bit of yeast going through the whole dough. It only takes that tiny amount and it spreads through everything. And I think that those little bits of stress, they spread through everything. And when you add enough in, it becomes overwhelming. That little bit of salt. If you got too much salt in a lasagna, I once had the worst lasagna. It was just salt. I couldn't taste anything but salt. It had just been overloaded. And it's not necessarily a lot of salt that was put in, but salt's very strong. And once it's in there, it starts to overwhelm it. And you can't really do anything to get the salt out. That's kind of what we live with day to day, with these little stresses, wars, rumors of wars, people who are doing stupid things, who's going to be in power, what's going to happen with the government, what's going to happen with other people's governments, what's happening overseas, what's going to happen with things like PIP, what's going to happen with so many different things. We're bombarded with it every day. We live in this social media rich, we're informed, and there's so many brilliant things about being this informed. But I think it gets overwhelming and we just become overcome with it. How do we manage that? There's a point where I just have to go, I'm not going to read anymore, because this is starting to affect me, isn't it? It's starting to affect my mental well-being, my mental health. The point of this isn't to answer any questions. I think it's more to share with you what we've been through and the challenges, and understand that you're not alone. I'm guaranteeing that almost everybody who's watching this has got stuff going on in their life that they don't talk about necessarily, don't let it out there. I think we need to talk about this stuff more, and that's what I kind of want to do with this, is just opening up about the challenges that I get. It can be very easy to see that somebody has all the answers, or because I've got some knowledge behind me that, we don't go through the same things, or we've learned and we're cruising along now. Every day is a new challenge. And some days can be harder than others. Some weeks can be harder than others. Some years can be harder than others. I think it's keeping the knowledge that there's a light at the end of that tunnel. I'm making sure I'm doing what I can to look after myself, prioritizing that so that I'm there to make sure that my family are at their best and that they're being supported the best they can. My catchphrase, I guess, to associate with that is, it's not selfish to be self-caring. I'm going to endeavour to do that myself. I'm going to sign off now, but thank you for joining me. Please, I'd love to hear your comments on this. Please do chuck them in the comments. Anything you've experienced, maybe stuff that you're going through. Share, let's be open, let's get this stuff out there so that people realise that we're not just addendums to a bigger story. We are the story. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.